I am the founding executive director of the Chicago Literary Hall of Fame. In 2010, we started to induct our greatest historical writers, and then 2 years later, we instituted a parallel tradition of honoring our greatest living writers. Harriette Gillem Robinet is tonight's honoree. When I look out tonight, I see babies and children and young adults and middle-aged people and elderly, and I see black and white and Asian and Latinx and even an American Indian. I see people with mobility issues and memory issues and people from all over the spectrum. This is Harriette Gillem Robinet's world. It is a world that she helped to foster and build in Oak Park, and it is a world that she helped to foster and build through her stories and her books. Tonight, as I said, we have this sterling lineup of readers. I'm not going to go into great depth. I'm going to start, though, with Tsehaye Hébert. And Tsehaye is an extraordinary playwright, scholar, and institution builder who has spent much of her career working to improve accessibility in public spaces, particularly in theaters. So Tsehaye is going to start us off, and then, as I say, I'm going to segue in between, but only briefly. So now, Tsehaye Hébert.
Hallelujah. All right now. Alpha, Andrew, Dinah, Gideon, Goshen, Jay. Hallelujah. Jacob, Chloe, Solomon, Jerome, Moses, Nellie, Pascal, Peanuts, Pierre, Shorten and Bread Jackson, Virginia, Alpha to Xenia, A to Z, y'all. Did you see what she did in Walking to the Bus Rider Blues? Harriette left nuggets everywhere. The language is at once immediate and familiar. It is an unparalleled map back to who we are. Do you note the resilience in these stories? How children triumph again and again and again over circumstances that destroy many. Yet they prevail through kinship and skinship and friendship. Ingenuity, compassion, and smarts. How long has it been since we talked about young black children in those terms? Harriette has done so for decades. I learned so much rereading the books. I was back in segregated Louisiana, Baton Rouge, where I grew up and learned to read, as the family says, by colored-only signs and white-only signs. That's not true. I've been reading since 4. And had Harriette's books been around, I would have been reading since I was a zygote. I could tell you that right now. I hungered for those books. Rediscovering them as a parent, as a mother, and as an adult is such a joy. And back to Reconstruction and subjects that people think are too difficult for us to handle, though we lived it. Harriette's work is a roadmap, make no mistake. It is historic, it is emotional, it is intertextual text. It is everything that you want it to be and more. What a love story, Harriette and Mac. Oh my God, every word was just resonant for me. Treasure is defined as something of great worth, of value, a person, a collection of precious things. Bless your treasure. Do not bury your treasure. What makes it a treasure is when it is shared, when it lives beyond the maker and the giver. And then it's antiphonal, it's call and response, and it just keeps growing and building and building and building. And read the books. Pass them along. Honor your treasure. Thank you so much, family, for sharing your mother, for sharing your wife, for taking the time to write us back into history. For this, I am grateful.
There were so many reasons that I was thrilled that our selection committee, who are named in our program, chose to honor Harriette with one of our 2 Fuller Awards this year. Among them, the fact that we had never honored a writer whose audience was mainly children or young adults. As I look out and see a lot of educators in the audience tonight, I see other writers of young adult literature and children's literature. I think we all know how important and how critical it is to have extraordinary writers who are able to connect with that young audience. And I know of a few authors who have done it better and more persistently and with more grace and more love than Harriette. So I just wanted to point out that this is sort of breaking new ground for the Fuller Award, and I'm delighted that it happened tonight. Okay, so this is the second lie in your program, and this is the last lie, I promise, at least the last, one that you're going to detect. There's no video, so skip the part where it says video. But we do have, as our next speaker, Athena Williams, Oak Park Regional Housing Center's Executive Director. Another of, this is the Fuller Award always goes to a writer who is a Chicago or a local legend, whose accomplishments here are extraordinary, but always their reach and their influence and their importance extends way beyond Chicago. And that's true of a lot of the organizations here tonight, and that includes Athena Williams and the Oak Park Regional Housing Center as well. Athena?
Greetings, everyone. I'm so happy to be here, and congratulations. So I am actually taking an excerpt from one of Ms. Harriette Gillem Robinet's author's notes and books, which speaks to historical fiction that sets the tone for racial injustice as well as what it's like to be a low-income minority family struggling for safe and affordable housing, which resonates with the work we do at the Oak Park Regional Housing Center. Not just so much affordable housing, but housing stability, helping people to come together, to open up the community to people of color, something that the Robinet set forth in the late 60s, which is the work of the Housing Center today. Second, I'm going to also read the author's notes, which reveals that she marched for fair housing, something we still focus on today, participated in housing testing of realtors more than 30 years before it became a civil rights program, and most importantly, never gave up hope in America nor her dignity as a black woman as she sat through these moments that she set forth. So that's why I'm inspired to read about this today. The book is Walking to the Bus, Writer Blues, published in 2000. More than any book of historical fiction I've written to date, this story stirred my emotions because I lived under segregation. On my bicycle as a child in Virginia, I tried to race in the rain through a white neighborhood to reach home. Using this route, I would be home the next street over, in one block using the long way round. I would have had to ride several blocks, but black children weren't allowed to ride through white neighborhoods. In spite of the rain, white people screamed at me from their porches, and one gentleman got in his car and tried to run me down. His neighbors clapped. I was about 10 years old. I know what civil rights demonstrations meant for me. For a few years, our family joined in vigils, in testing of realtors, and in weekly marches for fair housing. We had the privilege of marching in Chicago with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., taking part in that nonviolent struggle established my self-respect as an African-American woman. I remember not only sitting in the back of the bus, but as a teen being put off the bus for not noticing that a white person needed my seat. In Louisiana, I sat behind a screen that read colored. If more white people boarded the bus, I had to get up and carry that screen farther to the rear of the bus. After about 13 months of walking, African Americans like Alfred Merrifield, the novel's main character, and his family boarded the Montgomery buses, free to sit where they wish. Their success set off nonviolent demonstrations to integrate restaurants, buses, trains, and waiting rooms all over the United States. Young people joined these demonstrations and went to jail for justice. Some white people united with the blacks in the struggle. If you all don't mind, I would also like to share a few of the recitals from this story, Bus Rider Blues. Oh, I'm singing the Bus Rider Blues, the Alabama Bus Rider Blues. I got me feeling down deep inside. I ain't never gonna be the same. So those words from that story resonate, as we know we still have work to do today, but also to congratulate you on what you foresaw then as a struggle to sort of change the ways of the world during this time, and know that we still need to work on these things today. So I thank you and I congratulate you.
Nora Brooks Blakely is a tremendous friend of mine and of the Chicago Literary Hall of Fame. She has served on our advisory council since its inception. She is, in her own right, a wonderful, accomplished writer of children's books, as well as a creator of children's theater. She is involved in so many different aspects of our cultural life and has made it so much better. Nora Brooks Blakely.
Speak the truth to the people. Talk sense to the people. Free them with honesty. That's how Mari Evans begins her iconic poem. Harriette Gillem Robinet's work is an understanding of those words. Harriette Gillem Robinet's life is an understanding of those words. Her work is a sentinel in the watchtower, guiding us through the current, obstinate obfuscation of the real. For history to be history again, we must speak truth. And Harriette G. Robinet does not shy away from the harsh realities. Mama's dead, Gideon. She kept asking for more food for the slaves. Folks saw the overseer shoot her down in the creek. Every time he thought about Mama getting shot, Pascal felt a fist ball up in his stomach. That white man just murdered his mama. This is from Robinet's book, 40 Acres and Maybe a Mule. I love that title. Written for ages 8 through 12. And oh, what is a poor sensitivity reader to do with a passage like this? Are we not supposed to know or say that the person on the other end of that gun was white? Should any pictures be of some vaguely brownish-looking person from non-traditional casting? People live in context. About 3,000 years or so ago, when I was teaching elementary school students, I often worked on persona stories with the kids. Whether it was a raindrop or a human being, I always insisted on my students writing in first person. Example, raindrop. Oh man, I am so close to the edge of this cloud. What should I do? One persona story was about being a slave, and for preparation, I talked about the kind of food slaves got to eat and why, how they often might go hungry. And one child, second grade I think, raised his hand in confusion and he asked, why can't they just go across the street and get something at Mickey D's? Why did he ask that? Because he needed context. Black, white, yellow, red, brown, or Martian, people need context. They need vivid word imagery and a connection to how they process their own lives. If you don't know who was who and what was what during the times of enslavement and Reconstruction and the Civil Rights era and the Black Power movement, then you don't know the ramifications of those times, and you won't recognize the after effects in the world of today. People need a road to empathy. And that's where you'll find Harriette, steadily paving that road, smoothing our path, not with concrete, but with context. In 40 Acres, Robinet shares the experiences of Gideon, Pascal, and Nellie as they struggle to find a freedom they legally already had, living the nightmares that for us are only the results of a bad meal we can escape in the daylight. For history to be history again, it must be in context, and it must be true. Yes, we face many challenges to truth, like misuse of ChatGPT and deepfake photos and videos. But there have always been threats to our reality, from books based on theories proven to be incorrect, to news anchors who flat out lie, to people and politicians, not always the same thing, who create barriers, to the real world with nonsense phrases like alternative facts. Robinet shares, he thought about the tree on the plantation where the overseer whipped slaves. Pascal had had to stretch his arms around that tree, and the man who switched his bare back with hickory sticks. Pascal gritted his teeth. How had he lived through that? Robinet puts Black lives in context. Black people looking at their lives today in the context of all we have survived in this country: slavery, redlining, lynching, less than average health care, education challenges. But to quote Maya Angelou, and still we rise. Now that's context. One more quote from one last poet. Gwendolyn Brooks said, "This is the urgency, live and have your blooming in the noise of the whirlwind." And in Harriette Robinet, we find the seeds for that blooming and the eye of our whirlwinds. Robinet once said about 40 Acres, "This is one story in one country, but any people's story is every people's story. Injustice causes suffering everywhere." Her commitment was, as she said, to have no villains but the systems. And that's why we shout hallelujah and say hail to Harriette Gillem Robinet. History can be history again. All we need to do is follow in her footsteps. All we need to do is speak truth. Thank you.
And Linda is coming up next. Linda Robinet is the youngest child of McLewis and Harriette. And I've gotten to know Linda just a little bit over the last 3 or 4 months, as well as Harriette and McLewis. And I can only tell you that this family is an inspiration with their generosity, their intelligence, their kindness, their openness. The way they live their lives is just something to, I think we can all model ourselves after. And Linda is a Robinet, and as an educator, she not only served the Oak Park schools for almost a quarter century, but her scholarship includes, and she's probably the foremost expert on her own mother's work. So now Linda Robinet is going to accept the statue and say a few words about her mother. Linda? Get a quick picture. Sure. Now I'm going to step up.
Okay. So the picture doesn't include me. Just as you're probably going, okay, this is Linda. She's the youngest of 6. There's only 5. That was before me. It is an honor to accept this amazing award on behalf of my mother. I struggled to write a speech. Sorry, I'm going to show my age as the youngest. Not quite young. Of gratitude on behalf of my mother, so I want to share a little bit of my mother's life story before she started writing stories. My mother's grandfather on her father's side, Richard Gillem, his wife Melinda, were indentured servants owned by Jesuits in Maryland. My mother's great-grandfather on her mother's side, Thornton Gray, was a slave owned by Mary Cutsis Lee, the wife of Robert E. Lee. The story goes that just before the beginning of the Civil War, the Lees called all of their slaves to the front yard of the great mansion and told them that there would be a great war over the issue of slavery. Lee told his slaves that Lincoln had asked him to stay with the Union Army, but that he could not. He was a Virginian before he was an American. He told them that he was freeing all of them, and he gave them plots of land. He told them at that point that this land was theirs to do with as they wished. My mother's great-grandfather, Harry Gray, was 12 years old. My mother's great-great-grandfather, Harry Thornton, received a large plot of land in Arlington, Virginia, and it was named the Gray subdivision. They divided the subdivision into lots and gave them or sold them to relatives and friends. Harry Gray married Martha Madison Horde, who was a slave at Montpelier, which is James Madison's plantation. The Gray family from Lee's mansion also had relatives owned by Dolly Madison. On one of the larger plots near Rolfe Street, her grandfather did a strange thing. He built a Washington-style brick row house with no windows on either side. He built it with his own hands out of brick bats, which are broken pieces of brick. That house still stands today and has a plaque naming it a designated Arlington County landmark. At some point, her family built a normal house on the lot next to the row house. This would become their summer home. My mother grew up in Washington, D.C., in an all-black neighborhood in a large, elegant row house on Westminster Street. She had 3 siblings, Eileen, Richard, and Gray. Eileen died as an infant of meningitis, and her brother Richard died during first grade of scarlet fever. Because of this, her older and only living brother, Gray, never attended his first year of first grade. He started school in 2nd grade. My mother was born when her mother was 40, 10 years after her brother Gray. She was always a very thin child, and her family was very concerned. One summer, her aunt gave her money to buy a scoop of ice cream on a cone every day. She faithfully conceded, but she gained no weight. Wish we could all have that problem. Her mother, Martha Gray, youngest daughter of Martha and Harry Gray, was a seamstress and also worked at the Treasury Department in the Foreign Funds Division. She filed letters from Germans who were Jewish, pleading for release of their invested funds. My mother's father, Richard Gillem Jr., son of Richard Gillem Sr. and Melinda, was a geography and a history teacher in an all-black middle school in Washington, D.C. The school was named in honor of the Grimke sisters, 2 white women who were leaders in the anti-slavery movement. My mother went to the same school. The best and worst year of her school experience was the year that she was in her father's class. He expected her to be a perfect student, and her classmates teased her about being the teacher's pet. My mother spent many summer weekends at Highland Beach, just south of Annapolis, along the Chesapeake Bay. Her uncle Parker, her father's twin, lots of stories about that, owned a beach house there. Highland Beach was an all-black resort where the likes of Booker T. Washington and W.E. Du Bois owned homes. Her father, the geography teacher, decided to expand his career. He went to law school at Howard Law School at night, passed the bar, and had many clients, but he never charged them. He continued teaching, and after a long illness, her father died of cancer when my mother was in high school. Her father had arranged that he, a devout Catholic, would not be buried in a Catholic cemetery so that his Baptist wife could be buried next to him. To mourn her father's death, her mother required her to wear only black for an entire year. Her classmates called her the Black Widow. When her brother Gray returned from the Navy, he convinced their mother that she should be allowed to wear the normal clothes of a teenager. At the end of high school, she and her mother moved permanently to their summer home in Arlington. They rented rooms in their Westminster Street house to single men. Everyone assumed that she would go to Howard University, an all-black university in Washington, D.C., and that she would become a teacher. But my mother had other ideas. She did not want to go to an all-black school. She did not want to go to any school near Washington. She discovered that there was an organization, the Catholic Interracial Council, at Catholic University, with a mission of placing black Catholic young women in all white Catholic universities. She told the agent that she wanted to be far from Washington, but not too far. She went to the College of New Rochelle, founded by the Ursuline sisters, in New Rochelle, New York. She was the only black student in the school. No one wanted her as a roommate, so she was in a room alone. There was a Chinese woman, Helen Wang, who had the same problem. No one wanted her as a roommate. She and Helen partitioned the university to allow them to be roommates. So they would not disturb the other students in the dormitory. They were assigned to the tower. It was a spacious, bright, and airy, except for freezing in the winter, but they loved it. My mother majored in biology, studied very hard, and took copious notes. But she didn't always get good grades. On one occasion, her classmates asked her to help them prepare for the final exam in bacteriology. All of her classmates received A's and B's. She got the only C in the class. She asked her teacher how that was possible. Her teacher told her that, as usual, she did answer every question correctly, which showed that she had a very good memory. But she knew she didn't have the capacity to comprehend the material. The next semester, that same professor asked her to be her lab assistant. At graduation, she had the highest grade point average in her class, but she received no honors. She was told that honors were given to students whose parents were generous donors. When she did go to apply for jobs, her teachers gave her strong recommendations. She loved her first job at Children's National Hospital in Washington, D.C., in the bacteriology laboratory. Unfortunately, she was put in the middle of a very sad incident. A young boy died because of a wrong sample analysis. Her supervisor said that it was my mother's fault and recommended her immediate dismissal. My mother kept a personal log of every sample analysis she did, so she had proof that she did not do that sample. It was her word against that of her supervisor, a highly respected professional with decades of experience. A white coworker broke rank and reported to Human Resources that she had seen her supervisor dump an entire batch of samples, including the one in question, without doing an analysis. It was called the sink test. My mother was advised by HR to just resign with the promise that they would help her get a good reference for her next job. As my father would say, funny sad, one of her funny sad memories is her daily routine for the bus trip from Washington back to Arlington. When the bus reached the Potomac Bridge, all the black people would move to the back of the bus. If there were no empty seats, she would have to stand. My mother enrolled in graduate school at Catholic University and found a new job at Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington, D.C. When she received her master's degree in bacteriology, her supervisor asked her to sign an immediate resignation because he did not want a black girl to have the highest degree in his group. Human Resources at Walter Reed advised her to resign, and they would help her find another job in a different department. She was assigned to the immunology department, headed by a woman. She was even allowed to use the laboratory after hours to work on her doctoral PhD dissertation. When my mother saw an ad on a bulletin board for biology teachers at two Catholic universities, one in Minneapolis and the other in Louisiana, she requested a sabbatical and applied to both. She was accepted by both and went to Xavier University in New Orleans, Louisiana. By chance, my dad was teaching physics there. My mother was a house mother in a girls' dormitory. The girls schemed to connect my mother and father, but nothing worked. The chaplain, Father Sullivan, helped by inviting both of them individually to an event without telling them that they were the only invitees. By the end of the school year, they were betrothed to marry. My father went to DePaul in Chicago, and my mother went back to Walter Reed and Catholic University to complete her doctoral PhD. They were married in 1960 in my mother's small, all-black Catholic church in Arlington by the priest, Father Sullivan, who had connected them at Xavier. Her roommate from New Rochelle, Helen Wang, was also there. They drove to Chicago in my mother's new Studebaker to the University of Illinois staff apartments in the medical center. They had a 0-bedroom, small efficiency apartment overlooking Ashland Avenue. They loved to blow bubbles from their 6th-floor windows. My brother Stephen was born there. When my second brother Philip joined our family, they moved to a 1-bedroom apartment. They moved to Oak Park in 1965. By 1969, my parents had 5 children: Stephen, Philip, Rita, Jonathan, and Marcia. To maintain her sanity, raising 5 children, she began her serious writing. In 1974, when she was 42, I was born, 11 years after the birth of my brother Stephen. The rest is history, or her stories. Thank you.